Welcome to the Cryptowriter podcast, where we track down the brightest and most interesting minds in the crypto space. Today, we're joined by computer programmer turned blockchain pioneer, economist, game theorist, freedom engineer, and entrepreneur, Dan Larimer. Larimer is the architect of BitShares, Steem, and the EOS blockchains, and he joins us today. How are you doing today, Dan?
Doing good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you just published a book, More Equal Animals, and thought we better spend a little time talking about that. It's quite the read. I'm on my second time through. A lot of fascinating topics. Would you like to give us the general rundown?
Sure. Yeah, so it's More Equal Animals, the subtle art of true democracy. The inspiration of this book was to really explore deep down the principles of governance and good government. This is largely derived from the challenges faced in the blockchain community with how do you govern blockchains when you've got token voting systems of different types. You get the voting systems on Steem, you got proof of work voting systems, and then you have just general democracy. And all these systems seem to be failing to defend our rights, defend our freedom, our liberty. And I really wanted to explore from a first principles perspective, like where does the legitimacy of voting come from? How do we make sure that it actually protects the individuals instead of undermining them? And one of the central themes of the book is that what we call democracies are really democracies in name only, right? They're dinos, right? We have dinosaur governments that devour their populations. Because, you might have 150 million people voting, but who gets to select the candidates, right? Who gets to control what subjects are communicated, what policies, right? So we end up with a two-party system. Why is that? And why aren't our rights being defended? And those are the things I go into in my book. And I introduce the concept of true democracy, where true democracy is the idea that you're maximizing the power of each individual and realizing that we all can't live on an island by ourselves and be completely self-sufficient. We have to cooperate. There has to be some kind of group decision-making. Right? Anarchy is the concept that there are no rulers, but there has to be an agreement on rules, and where do those come from? Right? So I go all the way back to the law of the jungle, right? And say, well, we're animals, and in the jungle, might makes right. Why do we have these concepts of natural rights and freedom of speech and all these things? Where do those things actually come from? And are they just ideas and things that we wish to be? And if might makes right, why do we want to organize into peaceful societies and form democracies and do all those things? And my conclusion is that because might makes right, two is stronger than one. Two people working together are stronger than two people operating in an uncoordinated fashion. And so under the law of the jungle, you want to organize as many people as possible because that is the best survival strategy. And you want to act in unison because that makes you stronger than other groups that are coordinating and acting in unison. And so that's where the need for consensus comes from, is how do we act in unison, right? And so blockchain space is all about reaching consensus in a Byzantine fault-tolerant way. Well, how does a society reach consensus on who owns what laws should be enforced in a Byzantine fault-tolerant way? And what are governments doing, right? So one of my premises in the book is that governments aim to disrupt the people's ability to reach consensus in an autonomous way. They want to divide people from each other and organize people into groups of millions or hundreds of millions or billions that have no coordination amongst them, right? And therefore they can't act in any, they can't form consensus. The governments want to prevent people from having family units that can act with consensus, because a family is stronger than an individual. They want to prevent families from forming churches that can act in consensus. They want to prevent towns from having the autonomy to act in consensus. And it's in this process that our rights are lost, that we lose the ability to defend ourselves, because we lose power, and power is what ends up concentrated when you have democracies of hundreds of millions of people voting for one leader. So the other concept I explore in the book is the role of dependency. You know, democracy is, you can only be said to be in a democracy if it's voluntarily entered into, right? But if you're dependent upon someone, it's no longer voluntary. And so as a society, you know, if you're dependent on somebody for food, you're their slave, right? If you don't have other options of where to get food and you need them to provide it to you, you do what they say. You know, you lose your autonomy, you lose your freedom. So your freedom comes from your ability to maintain autonomy over yourself and independent sources of the things you need. And so the reason you come together is so that to maximize individual autonomy, you need to maximize the autonomy of your family. To maximize the autonomy of your family, you need to maximize the autonomy of your, you know, extended family and so forth. And then eventually your town, your state, your nation, and so forth. And doing so means you have to design things so you can secede, so you're not creating dependencies in various places. And it means that there's actually some scale constraints that we need to worry about when we're thinking about how do you design governance systems at scale. Well, democracy only works at a small scale. So within, you know, 100 people, everyone can know everyone. It's within Dunbar's limit. There's reputation, things like that. There's accountability. Democracy can work at that scale. Everyone's relatively equal. But once you get to thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people, democracy doesn't work. In order to solve that, you've got to create democracies of democracies. And that's where the concept of hierarchical representative government comes in, and a new voting strategies that are free from corruption, that are easy to audit, that don't have identity voter registration problems, and all these other issues that come up you know, when people lose faith in the government because half the population doesn't believe the elections are legitimate when their side loses, right? Whether it's Republicans or Democrats losing, both sides feel that if they lost, it was an illegitimate election. And those problems lead to a massive breakdown. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of some of the ideas I laid out in my book. And you know, this book was an educational experience for myself. It helps me organize my thoughts and develop a cohesive theory of governance, of where rights come from, and the strategies that need to be deployed to reach that. And chief amongst those strategies are that you can't give somebody freedom as a service, right? You can't pay someone and have them give you service because you're now dependent upon them. If you want to create solutions to create freedom for people, you have to give them tools that allow them to operate in an independent manner. Right? Give somebody a solar panel, don't give them a connection to the grid. That's the difference between creating tools for freedom and services for slavery.
Excellent. That's a great summation. So let's dive a little deeper into some of these concepts. One of the terms that you use throughout the book, I think counterpoint to the law of the jungle, is the idea of a peace treaty. And you also write that governance could be viewed as nothing more than an operating system for society. So how do you, when you talk about, maybe we can get in a little bit to the hierarchical representative voting as well, and how do you see people forming something that might be able to be a lasting peace treaty among something that's sustainable and yet retains the independence of the groups that comprise it?
Sure. So under the law of the jungle, if you're constantly worried about defending your stash of food against other people, you're not going to be able to specialize or optimize, and your standard of living is going to be very, very low. So ideally, you want to cooperate with other people. So a effective survival strategy is to reach a peace treaty with those around you. And that means you reach a consensus on who owns what. And so now you can focus on, doing your thing. As long as you trust the other party to uphold the peace treaty, then everything works. Now, in order to have a peace treaty, you need to maintain the ability to defend yourself, right? To enforce the treaty. If the other party breaches the treaty, then the treaty's over. It's right back to the law of the jungle, right? So there's an equilibrium here where no one wants to breach the treaty and go back to the law of the jungle, because that means war. That means risk of death, right? So the problem occurs if one person gets so much stronger that they can breach the treaty with impunity, right? Which means that in order to have a peace treaty, everyone who's party to it has to proactively ensure that no one person gets too much stronger than any other person, and then it can work. So what that means is, you have to organize into groups into a hierarchy of equal parties. So, for example, if the United States was a democracy of states, each state would have exactly one vote per state, and they would all have equal ability to defend themselves, right? Each state has that, and each state has a dozen nukes. Why do they need more than that? Mutually assured destruction, they're all equals. They can now reach consensus, and each state would be responsible for making sure that it's got its own independent source of food and everything else, such that no one state becomes dependent upon any other state for the things they need. Because if they have a problem with the peace treaty and they say, hey, you guys, you're not upholding what we agreed to, right? Whether it's a constitution and a Bill of Rights or whatever it is, all right, peace treaty is over. We're not going to go to war with you, but we're going to secede. We're going to go and self-govern ourselves. You do you. And to the extent that systems, that's not practical because leaving would be so painful that no one wants to leave. Now you've got dependence, and that dependence is what enables slavery. It's what enables tyranny, right?
So you see all sorts of situations today where member states are threatening to leave larger bodies like the European Union, for instance, with Scotland and the Brexit. And then also, even with the United States, and there's a history, and you bring up in your book various rights of secession that were that the states had at one point that they gave away later on. Given that in the U.S. we've fought so hard to preserve the Union, and there's this sense of needing to preserve the Union, and we can go into the history there, but it's right along with the U.S. Constitution, it's considered to be such a sacred idea.
Fighting to preserve the Union is fighting to control other people, to deny them the freedom to leave. That's called slavery. So you could argue that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, but about the North attempting to enslave the South to a central government, right? And then blaming the South for slavery as the justification, right? So I'm very much against any type of force or trying to push your will on other people, right? And respecting everyone. And so if that's what you believe, you've got to allow people to express themselves differently and to live in peace and not force your will on everyone around you. So it's fascinating that we say, well, we are stronger when we can all come together and act as one nation. That means that we come together with a democracy and that we agree. And this is a democracy of states, not a democracy of 320 million people, right? Because the principle that the majority should rule, right? If California had 150 million people in their population, they automatically get to rule the entire United States. Well, that's saying China should rule the United States under that premise. It's saying the cities should rule the countryside. And it's a very, very dangerous philosophy to just say more numbers means that there's a right of power. All more numbers means is more jungle power, right? They're saying we've got more people, so therefore do as we say, or we're going to outnumber you,
or else.
Yeah, right. That's not peace. That's not nonviolence. That's not democracy. That's not consent of the governed, right? Consent of the governed means that you get a group of people together and we're going to agree on the process by which we are going to reach consensus. And then we're going to voluntarily abide by the outcome of that consensus, even if we disagree with the output of the consensus, on the basis that that us acting together is actually better than completely dividing apart. But you came together for consensus under certain assumptions, right? If you have two wolves and a lamb, or voting on who's going to eat for dinner, that might be acceptable as long as lamb was not on the menu of things to vote for, right?
Right.
And so if they say, hey, we're going to create a constitution, we're going to vote on what to eat. Oh, and by the way, wolves and lamb is not on the menu, right? And then after that you agree to that democracy, the wolves say, yeah, change of plans. We're going to vote to eat lamb. Well, now the lamb says, I'm going to secede, right? I no longer agree to the process, right? You have violated the integrity of the original constitution. So it really comes down to what is the best way for people to reach consensus and maintain their ability to maintain their autonomy and to develop new consensuses, right? You'll find that what people want to do is they'll use some process to reach consensus that they should be in power. And then as soon as they're in power, they want to dismantle the process that put them into power so that no one else can reach consensus to put anyone else in power.
Sounds familiar. Sounds like our government today, our broken peace treaty today. So what's your elevator pitch for hierarchical representative voting, or political playoffs as you've called it?
Yeah. Also, I introduced a process in my book. I call it political playoffs, or hierarchical representative voting. And the idea is that for a given population size, what's the most effective way of selecting a leader, somebody to be in charge, or approving something. And what we have is, if you use the voting system like we have in the United States, you get a two-party system where the parties actually represent a consensus outside of government. And it's the same kind of thing that we see in the blockchain space, where you have people colluding outside of the consensus protocols of the network in order to institute hard forks or to manipulate the on-chain governance in order to steal money from all the people, right? And we see this with exchanges voting with user tokens to reward themselves. We see on Steemit, we have large token holders voting to reallocate tokens from everyone else. So instead of acting in the best interest of the community, that they'd rather have a bigger slice of a smaller pie, or they want more power, or they want something else. And so whatever system of governance you put in place on chain, people are going to coordinate around it, right? So if you implement a voting system like we have in the United States, that in theory is supposed to represent the people, instead, we're supposed to have 3 different branches of government that are supposed to be independent, checks and balances and all that. Instead, we get parties that organize outside. They have their own governance structures that are not democratic. Right? They might have elections, but they get to make their own rules. They have party insiders that get to select people. And then these parties put people across all branches of government, right? And so now you end up with Congress that's half Republicans, half Democrats, and people are voting along party lines. They're not loyal to the country. They're not making independent decisions, right? Congress is not, the Senate, not 100 independent decisions. Because if any senator breaks with their party, they lose funding, they lose influence, they lose committee seats. So they have to go with the party. And that means that we have some other hidden, unstated form of governance in this country. And it's the governance that controls who is leading the parties. And that's largely dictated by who owns the media and whatever the party's governance is. So hierarchical representative governance recognizes that it's not just about voting and seeing, do more people like Trump or Biden. That's not democracy, because how was Trump and Biden selected, right? Who chose who we got to vote for? So what we would really like is to make it so that anyone in the world or in a population who wants to participate in governance has the opportunity to be elected without the need to join a political party. In fact, we want to make the rules such that forming a political party is pointless. It's not just it's against the rules, because you can't define political parties as being against the rules any more than you can declare that vote buying on EOS is against the rules, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to happen unless you establish a process that just makes it so that there's no way to coordinate or organize into parties for advantage in the process itself. So no political parties, no campaigning, no fundraising, no incumbent advantage, right? No need to worry about the media slandering you and tearing you apart because you're campaigning. And a process that encourages people to reach compromise and move toward the least offensive position rather than polarizing positions that are eventually at war. So the hierarchical representative process does that. And the way it does that is it groups people into random groups of 10. It could be 7, it could be 12, but divide people up into random groups and then make each group reach a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus, or 2/3 plus 1 consensus. So let's say 7 or 8 out of 10 must pick one person from their group to represent them at the next level. And then you repeat this process at the next level, right? So if you have 10,000 people, you end up with 100 groups of 10, and then you end up with 100 people, which divide up into 10 groups of 10, and then you end up with a final group of 10. And at each level, it's randomized. It's the randomization that prevents political parties from forming. And that's a critical element. Without that randomization and grouping of people will self-select into parties. But the randomization kind of forces a sampling of the population. And then the 2/3 majority really forces compromise and prevents anyone from advancing. And lastly, the only people you can vote for are the people in your group. You don't need to study someone's campaign promises in the media and try to vote for someone who you don't know. You don't need to understand every single issue out there. All you need to do is understand someone you're having a discussion with. So the entire governance process could be done with 1 day's worth of effort. You go to a meeting in your local community and you talk to 10 people for an hour or two, and you get to know them really well, what they stand for, and you identify the most acceptable person from your group to move forward. And that's it. You don't need to consider the bigger picture. And this gets to another problem with traditional politics, the belief that there is somebody who can study everything out there and is the best person to advance and can actually make decisions, right? And that the voters are supposed to vote for that person, right? That means every single voter is supposed to have enough knowledge about enough issues to actually cast a responsible vote. In my book, I quote some studies that show the typical voter is negatively informed, right? They're more misinformed than informed, such that even on basic issues, the probability of getting the correct answer is better by flipping a coin than by asking people to vote, asking what their thoughts and polling them, which is really, really scary from a, is this democracy legitimate point of view? There's a information theory problem here. It's kind of, there's a scaling problem. And so people are rationally ignorant. They're not voting from knowledge. And so what they are voting on is based on feelings and propaganda and media influence versus any real in-depth thinking.
Say more about rational ignorance. That's a concept that was new to me that helped explain a lot of what I see in the world, and it makes it easier to understand why things are the way they are. Maybe you could.
Sure. Yeah, rational ignorance is the concept that there's a cost associated with acquiring knowledge. If you actually want to understand what's going on in the world on any particular issue, you probably need to read a dozen books per topic, right? And even then, you're just scratching the surface. So that's a big investment of time and energy on your part, when most people have to, they've got a ton on their plate already, just trying to earn a living and spend time with family and have fun. So there's a high cost there to learning that information. And what's the benefit of learning that information? You get to cast a vote in which it's statistically insignificant, or the probability that your vote is going to make a difference in the outcome is incredibly low. It's going to have no impact on you, particularly when you only have the choice of voting for two parties, right? And both parties are largely the same on the issues that matter. So there is no rational reason to invest the time and energy. So you're ignorant, right? It's rational ignorance, because it'd be irrational to get rid of your ignorance on these subjects unless you just enjoy it and have a passion for it. So most people will be rationally ignorant, which means most people's votes are a vote from a state of ignorance on any topic. Furthermore, the belief that there's any person that is able to study enough things to not be widely ignorant on something, and that our voting process is going to identify that person, very small, right? So what hierarchical representative governance does is it actually allows us to tap the wisdom of the crowds to aggregate local information. Every group of 10 has different information, different set of information. They're evaluating different people, and they're making decisions based upon that group of people and not based upon global policies. They're making decisions based on people they can talk to, which means you can factor in all kinds of other ways of communicating, right? Nonverbal communication. You can know them by name. You can hold them accountable as they advance, and they can, when they do get in power, they can communicate back down and demonstrate how they represented you. And it's also filtering for quality, right? Instead of the person who's best at campaigning and having, quick slogans, right? Sound clip, sound bite. And instead of the person who's going to promise everyone everything they want to hear and then flip-flop constantly, you get people that can actually persuade a room of 10, right? And maybe they're at the base level, you're going to have a lot of people aren't very good, but as people advance up, it's like a tournament. You get better and better people that are more and more persuasive and more motivated to win, and they have to reach consensus, So we're going to elect the person that's best at reaching consensus instead of the person who's best at dividing people, lying to people, has the media right now. So the rules of the game dictate the qualities of the leaders that are selected. An analogy could be made to the game of chess. If we were to say that politics and the skill of running a country or a nation or the world or whatever is like the game of chess. Some people are going to be really, really talented, and some people are going to be terrible at playing chess, right? And so now you have China and the United States, and they're playing a game of international chess against each other, and their populations have to pick somebody from among them to play chess against the other side, right? How do I identify the best chess player, right? When you don't even get to see them play. So if we try to pick the best chess player based on today's voting system, you have all kinds of people say, vote for me, I'm great at chess, I promise. I've never played it, but I've read a lot of books on it, and I believe that the pawns should have more power, right? And so everyone starts voting for a leader that's going to put the pawns in power. And then they get up there, and they're not going to have they will not have demonstrated the ability to play chess. In fact, they will only demonstrate the ability to convince other people that are rationally ignorant about how to play chess because they don't spend the time to learn it. Those are the people who are going to be elected, and then they're going to go and actually try to play chess. Is that the person you want playing chess for you when the stakes are so high? Or would you set up a chess tournament where everyone who wants to be president plays chess at a small scale, and then the winner plays chess and the winner plays chess? So you create a game that selects for qualities that demonstrate capability or capacity to govern and compromise and reach consensus. And you have people play that game in a tournament style to select the winner rather than a popularity contest based on rationally ignorant voters. That's the concept in the book. That's the concept of how do we get decentralization and independence and freedom.
Cool. Yeah, that was a long elevator ride, but it's a very hard topic to condense onto a proper elevator pitch. But one of the other interesting things that you didn't mention, I think, is that the groups that are not able to reach consensus don't advance. They don't send anybody up the process, and I like that from like a Darwinian standpoint. It's a selection against people that cannot form consensus, or if there's a group that has too many polarizing figures in it and none of them will concede ground to the other, then they just kind of don't get to have any representation further down.
Right. The Byzantine failure is when you don't get 7 or 8 out of 10 to agree. They don't get to be represented because they've demonstrated an inability to. It's like a chess tournament where they stalemate. No one won, right? No one advances, and that's an important element for keeping psychopaths out. There's another element to. Sorry, I just lost it.
I was going to ask another question. One thing that I hear a lot when I try to explain this idea to people is what just keeps the process from devolving into selecting only for the most beautiful and charismatic people among us. You mentioned something about how to create games that maybe select for different traits or whatever. But
sure, if you want to select leaders with good traits, maybe just have them play chess, right? If chess wasn't a game that you could cheat with computers and the like, but that would select for people that have the trait of being intelligent and seeing patterns and having strategy, right? And you can have different games, right? Like physical competition, right? The strongest person, right? Each of these has a different Pareto distribution, if you will. right? Pareto distribution is principle that 80%, 20% of the effort produces 80% of the results. 20% of the people have 80% of the income. It's not necessarily 80-20. Sometimes it might be 90-10 or whatnot, but Pareto principles exist everywhere in nature. And we see it in populations of cities. We see it in size of people, income distributions, and the like. And so you'll see a Pareto distribution in the number of people that are psychopaths, right? The 10% of the people have more psychopathic tendencies than the other 90% of the people combined, right? And so if you design a game that favors that group, they're going to outplay everyone else, right? And then there's the bigger a country gets, the bigger a population gets, the greater the extreme, right? You have more talented players at a big school than a small school. And so, when you look at the greater the population, the greater the variance between the best and the average. So you look at the ratio of the number of people leading a country, right? So you have 500 people leading the United States and 320 million people. Well, that means you're just picking off the very tip of the Pareto principle, right? The top 520 people that are best at playing the whatever game we've set up. And so the bigger a country gets, the bigger the governance structure gets, the more it tends toward electing psychopaths and tyrants, right? And unless we change the rules of the game such that it doesn't favor people with those tendencies, that is going to be the outcome every single time. And so I suggested a game of, hey, group people into 10 and force them to reach consensus. That's a game. We don't necessarily know what type of traits are most optimal for playing that game because we haven't played it at a large scale yet.
Sure.
So it might select for some unfavorable traits. But if you have multiple different types of games that are selecting for different traits, the person that's the best psychopath is not necessarily going to be the person that's the best arm wrestler, right?
And you could use the game you could use the process itself to create a better process too, because it could be used for that as well. So it's kind of potentially a self-correcting process, being that it doesn't cede control to unreachable, governance that's outside the, So that's good.
Yes. And that's another reason why randomness is necessary, right? So let's just go back to chess as the example. If the game is chess and we're always going to take the top chess player based on a competition, we're going to have the same person ruling us for a really long time, because the best of the best, every generation there might be someone else who knocks them off, but there's very slow turnover in who's the best at any given skill set. So what you really want to do is filter to find the best 10,000 people by some game, and then randomly select from among that set. They'll find very talented people without giving bias to any particular trait, right? So if Congress was selected not from the top 500 people of a game that rewards psychopathic behavior, but from the top 100,000 people and randomly selects from that, you're going to get a more representative, a better representation of the people while still having a degree of skill and vetting of those people. An analogy could be made of the difference between selecting a basketball team that's only the best basketball players in a school, in which case it's going to have everyone's going to be tall and athletic, or you select, you have the top 100 basketball players and you randomly select 10 for your team. Now that 10 is going to be a better representation of the student body, because there's more variation in the top 100 than there is
Mm-hmm.
in the top 10. But you're still going to have a better team than if you randomly selected 10 people from the entire school, which would be much lower quality basketball players on average. So there's a need to use a Pareto distribution or a competition of some to identify quality, and then to randomly select among the top of it to prevent over specialization, and to still have a kind of a representation of skills.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's a lot to go into there, and you know, people that are interested should check out Dan's book, More Equal Animals. It's quite the read. It covers all sorts of topics that we probably won't have time to get into today, unless you want to say a few words about the chapter on moral hazard at all. I thought that was really
yes.
fascinating.
I got two last things about the book. First, I'd like to address the name, More Equal Animals. It's from Animal Farm. You know, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Is the concept. You know, as it's a story of how, you know, we say we want democracy and we say we want everyone to be equal, but in reality, people actually aren't equal. And so the purpose of the book is how can we actually make people more equal in power and more democratic, while alluding to animal farms, you know, how things go wrong with more equal animals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about animals and the law of the jungle.
Mm.
And so that's where the name comes from. And yes, I'd like to address the moral hazard chapter of the book, which I think is a very underappreciated subject, because it speaks to problems that we have across society, blockchain with governance problems on EOS and block producers. It's all about moral hazard there. So an analogy I use in the book is, imagine you're going out to dinner with a group of people, right? And if you go out with a large group of 100 people and you say, you know what, we're all going to split the bill equally. Order whatever you like. Well, people are going to eat far more than they would if they're going to spend their own money. And people might say, nah, I'm going to be better. I'm only going to do what I would do otherwise. All right. So they get the bill and they realize that, hey, this is higher than I'd spend otherwise. If you repeat this game a couple of times, you'll realize, you know what? I might as well get my fair share. I'm going to order more too. And if you don't have the ability to opt out, right, ability to secede, there's no check and balances, and things spiral out of control until people can't afford the bill anymore, right? Mm-hmm. You say you now have some people at the table that say, you know what, this bill is too expensive. I can't pay my equal share. So then people usually get the bright idea, make the rich guy pay for the poor guy, the guy who can't cover his share of the bill. That allows the game of moral hazard to continue until costs get so out of control at this dinner table that even the rich guy can't afford to feed everyone lobster and filet mignon 3 times a day, right? Because people are just ordering whatever they want. So I ask myself a question. Who's benefiting from the moral hazard of this dinner party that's going out to eat and splitting the bill? The restaurant. If you wanted to design a restaurant that would maximize your revenue, you'd make every single table split the bill evenly, right? Every single person's responsible for doing that. And then you'd maximize revenue of your restaurant. Well, governments are in the business of creating moral hazard so that they can come in and be the solution. They say, oh, this isn't fair. You need more government, right? And so, health insurance, like the entire insurance industry, is an exercise in moral hazard. And even the justice system is subject to the same problem with moral hazard. And the solution is always to make people responsible for what they're paying, and to have the ability to secede. You might have a group of people that get together, right, and say, we're going to split the check. No big deal. If it's a small group, just you and your date, you can split the check. because you know that you're going to pay for 50% of any cost increase.
Mm-hmm.
But when there's 100 people or 1,000 people, you're only paying for 1% of any cost increase. And you know there's going to be reputational damage because they'll know, hey, you're the one that you're ordering steak and you're the one making me pay for it, right? And so there's this feedback mechanism at small scale. The bigger the scale gets, the less feedback mechanism there is, the greater the moral hazard becomes for those who get to spend other people's money effectively. And so I outline that in the book, and I outline the need to design systems that, as much as possible, minimize moral hazard. And just by being aware that the restaurant owner profits to the extent they can force people into arrangements of moral hazard, allows us to say, well, who's the restaurant owner that's making me spend money on taxes and making us split the bill? And then you start to see how large democracies are rife with moral hazard, because you're casting a vote where it costs you nothing, and you're voting for an equal share of whatever the community's spending the money on. Right? It's the definition of moral hazard in typical voting solutions. So I think that's it for the book.
Yeah, there's so much there. There's, and getting the section on the justice system blew my mind. It's so worth reading. Some of the ideas you present there are really thought-provoking. We might have to make this a two-parter because I know you have a hard stop in like 11 minutes or so. And we haven't touched on something that probably a lot of people are wanting to hear about. Recently on Twitter, you wrote that you're not retiring. For those that don't know, Dan recently stepped down as CTO of Block One to pursue some other projects. He says he's not retiring. You're regrouping in an effort to realize an increased decentralization, a decentralization that has everyone talking to everyone peer-to-peer fashion, not everyone depending on a website or a server to provide an API. And recently, you started a discussion on GitHub announcing a project called Clarion. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, I agree. There's so much to say about Clarion that we should have an entire hour-long discussion just about Clarion. But in summary, the idea is to create a social network that's a friend-to-friend network, where all your tweets and everything you want to say, you get to push them, and they're hosted on your friends' computers, and then they can forward them on to anyone else who wants to follow you. This can be used for email, so you're not dependent upon any single email server. I think this is probably, I guess, the biggest differentiator from the things that are out there. Email is typically considered a decentralized system, right? You have anyone can set up an email server and anyone can email anyone, right? It's decentralized until Google shuts down your Gmail account and your identity is blown out of the water, right? And all the websites you log into, and you really depend on that email. You don't actually own the email. A third-party service, the domain, owns the email. And even if you get your own domain, you don't really own that, right? Because domains can be seized and taken from you. So how would we create an email system that you actually did own, that no one could take your email from you? And yet not require everyone to have a server that's operating 24/7, right? If everyone had a computer at home and everyone just dialed anyone else's computer and left their messages in the inbox, it'd be great. But not everyone's a system admin. Not everyone has 24/7 reliability and so forth. So you can look at, imagine that your Google account could also be hosted by Apple and Microsoft. And it's the same account, and people who want to send you messages can deliver it to any one of those 3 different services. And if one of them blocks you, you've got the other 2. It's the exact same email account. If they all block you, you spin up your own node and you still have your email account and people can still reach you. All right. Now, imagine if instead of having to rely on big companies like that to provide these services to you, you have your friends and family who have servers. Everyone's got computers and old cell phones and laptops and things that they can use on their home internet connection. The amount of data that we have available just to store on our disks is far more than most people actually need, right? For your email and whatnot. We've got terabytes of storage these days. And the amount of data we're generating in the form of emails and tweets and Facebook posts and the like, if you ignore the YouTube videos for a moment, it's a very small amount of actual data. So you could store all of your messages and all the messages of the 150 people that are closest to you, right? Dunbar's number, you can't be close to more than 150 people. You could store all those on a typical computer with minimal bandwidth. If someone wants to send you a message, they can just connect to one of your friends if they can't connect to you directly, right? Because you're offline. And then when you come back online, you connect to one of your friends, and you eventually get all your messages, and it's reliable, and it's completely decentralized, free of any need to have domain names and all those other things. So we can apply this general philosophy to do email, to do things like Twitter and Facebook, and to do internet forums and the like. It's not a blockchain, which I call logically centralized, where every single computer has to process every single message, right? That would be like everyone having to have a complete copy of every email Google processes or a complete copy of Facebook on their home computer. That's just too much. That does not scale. It forces people into dependency on a service. So Clarion's about giving people the tools to download an application, double click on it, run it, create an account on the local application, and then invite their friends to connect without having any servers or any business that has to provide service to you. So that's Clarion in a nutshell. There's a lot of deep technical discussions and ways that we can explore how messages pass through the system, but it's far more decentralized than federated systems like Mastodon or Matrix or any DHT, distributed hash table based system like IPFS and the like. These DHT systems and other peer-to-peer systems are all about anonymous peers connecting to anonymous peers and sharing data, and that has abuse problems, risk of content you don't want, unfiltered content ending up on your computer from anonymous people. They're slow, like lookup times are slow and unreliable and things like that. So there's a lot of projects out there that sound like they're providing the promise of a federated, decentralized social media system, but all they're really delivering is a federated system like email, and we all see how easy it is to lose your email account and lose your online identity. Federated systems are better, but they don't reach the level of decentralization that gives people the independence necessary to secure their life, liberty, property.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have to do a follow-up Clarion discussion as things develop. I'm glad you're working on that. I know I spoke to you a long time ago, and you were thinking about that back in 2015. Some sort of way of, you've always had your heart in the goals, your mission to secure life, liberty, and property, and you've not wavered from those goals. So thanks for still keeping at these projects that could provide real value for humanity. Yeah, you do have a hard stop in 4 minutes or so, right? Is that
Yep.
true? So one other question I have to get to is Cryptowriter has launched NFT, and it's called Crypto Finny, and we're hoping to create a Dan Larimer themed Crypto Finny. Would you be interested in having an NFT with your likeness? Yeah.
I'm honored. Interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, and do you have you gotten into NFTs at all? Do you have it?
I think NFTs are interesting. I think they're the fine art of the crypto world. The wealthy have been using art for a long, long time to store value in the form of NFTs. They're non-fungible physical things.
Yeah.
And crypto has got the benefit that you don't have to worry about it degrading, and it's easier to secure and everything else. And it's all about the uniqueness. So it'll be interesting to see what qualities are more selected for over others in these NFTs.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Well, yeah, I look forward to talking to you again, and we can get in deeper to Clarion and how the work you're doing with Clarion can even bring some benefit to EOS and other systems out there. But so much, thanks so much for your time today, Dan. Always a pleasure to talk with you. And if you're interested in discovering more about Dan's new project, Clarion OS, you can check the links in the description below and join the conversation. I'll include all the details there, and be sure to.
And don't forget to get a physical copy of the book.
Yeah.
The book is free as PDF on my website, but every dollar I make from the book, I'm going to use to promote the book and promote the ideas of life, liberty, and freedom. To get a copy of the book, share it with other people, and let's take back our independence and reach a new consensus.
Awesome. And the physical copy is like kind of the ultimate in decentralized distribution of ideas in a way. So that's kind of fun.
You can get that at moreequalanimals.com.
Cool. Yeah, I'll include the link to that below. And yeah, be sure to like and subscribe and check back for more amazing interviews from across the world of blockchain, and join the Cryptowriter community on voice.com through the links below, and keep an eye out for what we're up to next. So for now, on behalf of the team at Cryptowriter, stay curious. We wish you all the best. And thanks again, Dan, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.